Good day everyone, I'm your teacher Roxanne and welcome to my channel.
This is episode 2 of Technology for Teaching and Learning 2, Integrating Active Learning Approaches and Language Learning. So for today's lesson, the following are the learning outcomes. At the end of this episode, the students are expected to discuss the concepts of the different learning approaches in language teaching and learning, discuss how information and communication technologies will help develop and present language lessons using the different active learning approaches, brainstorm on the possible products or outputs that will serve as an evidence of learning of the developed learning outcomes of the learning plan using inquiry-based learning, problem-based learning, and project-based learning, and integrate active learning activities in the development of language learning plans. Language learning encompasses the development of the macro skills such as the reading, writing, listening, speaking, and viewing. These skills are intertwined, especially when they are used in communication. Now, is it possible to target more than 2 or 3 of the macro skills in one learning activity? The answer is yes. However, this largely depends on the approaches used by the language teacher in facilitating the development of learning competencies in the language classroom. One way to achieve this end is the utilization of active learning approaches. So, what are these active learning approaches? Active learning approaches are characterized by learners' engagement in activities that are geared towards the generation of new knowledge or making meaning to an existing knowledge while developing the other 21st century skills, such as collaboration, media literacy, critical thinking in the process. 4 of the recent active learning approaches introduced to enhance the teaching learning process are the inquiry based learning, research based learning, problem based learning, and project based learning. These learning approaches are designed to give more depth and breadth in the learning of content in the K 12 curriculum. While these approaches are meant to provide opportunities for active exploration of content, each of these approaches has distinct characteristics that needs to be considered by teachers in the realization of learning competencies, especially in language teaching. Central to active learning approaches is the construction of framing questions that will guide the learners in their investigation either on specific topic or unit. Investigations become more meaningful when these are related to real life experiences or real world issues or problems. Now, let's have lesson 1, inquiry based learning and research based learning. Okay, the specific learning outcomes for this lesson are um, the students should be able to discuss the salient features of inquiry-based learning and research-based learning and their application to the attainment of language learning competencies and language learning outcomes. Analyze how technologies for teaching and learning languages can be maximized in inquiry-based learning and research-based learning, and state some performance standards from the curriculum guide that can employ inquiry-based learning and research-based learning. So let's start. So before we go to the lecture proper, I want you, my dear students, to do the following activity. This exercise will help us attain our lesson objectives. So I'm giving you the step-by-step procedure. Are you aware of the KWL chart? I know you have used this before in your language lessons. So I'm going to give you what you will have to do in order to fulfill this activity or this exercise. So first one is you have to familiarize yourself with the concept of the KWL chart, although in the next slide, I'm going to show you a model of the KWL chart. Analyze the contents of the charts and think of how you could use this chart in facilitating your language lessons. So this is the KWL chart model that I mentioned a while back. So The first part of it is the language topic, and then the big question. So there are three columns there. We have what I know, what I want to know, and what I learned. For our step two, you have to start with an essential or big question. So, how do we do this? Since inquiry based learning usually starts with essential or big questions that elicit varied answers from the respondents, think of a question that you would like to ask your students relevant to a specific lesson in your language class. Do this in a group of 5 members. Okay, and then some example questions may be, why do we need to learn how to listen? Why is there a need to be engaged in the public speaking? How do children with special learning needs communicate? How do we know the language struggles and the stories of the people of long ago? What is one main characteristic of young children that helps them to know about the world they live in? And write your big question in the KWL chart. So that's what you first thing you will have to do. And then for step three, you have to find out what we know. Eliciting from your collective lived experiences as group mates, provide an answer to the big question you identified. Then record your answer through filling in the first column of the KWL chart. In this step, each member is expected to actively participate to fully answer the KWL chart. As you do the activity, writing and speaking skills can be observed to be demonstrated by each member. This activity can be done at any level in your language classes in the future. You need to allow some students, like for example, in the preschool level, to draw their answers in the chart if they cannot write their answers in verbal form. Step 4, finding out what we want to know. To allow you to freely explore about what is in store in the world around you, fill in the second column of the KWL chart. By answering the second column, you will be able to think of other possible information that is beyond the knowledge that you have about the big question. This activity contributes to the development of inquisitiveness of students. Step 5, finding out the answer from experts. To be able to learn better about the topic and big question, get on searching for an answer to the questions from reliable sources. Sources may refer to your language teachers, or from the library resources like digital or printed resources. Conduct interview with some teachers or other human resources who may give an answer to the question, or get information from the library resources. Record your interview data or literature review data. And step 6, finding out the answer we have learned. Finally, organize the results of your gathered data and write your answer in column 3 of your KWL chart. So that is the first activity that you will have to do. Are you ready? Okay, let's move on to the lecture part. The inquiry-based learning. First, what is inquiry? Inquiry is a process of asking questions. It is also defined as the study of many fields that enable various scientists and experts to provide solutions about the current issues. Now let's have the definitions of IBL, or inquiry-based learning. According to Marx, inquiry-based learning is an instructional strategy that brings teaching and learning into alignment with the student and the skills needed for the future success. Tanim and Grant define IBL as rooted in construction, which is a learning theory and states that humans construct their own knowledge and meaning from their personal experiences. IBL is an instructional practice where students are at the center of the learning experience and take ownership of their own learning by posing, investigating questions. That's according to Caswell and Laborie. Now, the nature of inquiry based learning. Inquiry based learning, or IBL, as an approach, essentially involves tasks requiring learners' active participation in finding answers to curricular questions. In a language classroom, employing this can facilitate the development of communication skills such as writing questions, finding answers, and presenting outputs as evidence of inquiry. In fact, this approach encourages students to work together in order to accomplish their task. Now, when do we use the IBL? IBL offers an appropriate approach upon learning language variations, identity, and power. Since IBL provide learners with opportunities to learn about current issues in social linguistics through sharing and debating personal experiences from multiple perspectives. Now, these are the types of inquiry. The following is a brief summary of VIU's four types of inquiry that can be used in facilitating classes. So we have one is the structured inquiry. This lets the students follow the lead of the teacher as the entire class engages in one inquiry together. And we have number two, controlled inquiry. The teacher chooses topics and identifies the resources that the students will use to answer questions. Number three, we have guided inquiry. The guided inquiry lets the teacher choose topics or questions and students design the product or solution. In the free inquiry, the students are allowed to choose their own topics without any reference to a prescribed outcome. It is important also to note the role of the teacher in this approach. The success of IBL largely depends on the careful planning of the teacher in relation to the curriculum. The language teacher needs to look into the learning competencies that can be satisfied by a simple inquiry or more complex inquiry. He controls and prepares the topic for investigation and guides the learners by setting the questions to be explored. Learners are allowed to design their own way of investigation and present their outputs using technology tools that are afforded to them. When technology is coupled with IBL, a gateway to information is opened and students can have access to information at any time and anywhere. It is assumed that the teacher is knowledgeable of the sources of information and whether the learners have access to these sources.